This week's content will focus further on analog audio. In this week's content, we will focus on defining more specific elements of analog audio situations, such as live audio, mixing, and editing. We will be understanding more advanced terminology associated with analog audio, as well as the hardware involved, notably the analog mixer, the tape recorder, and record player. We will be exploring the history and development of analog audio recording and editing techniques and how they apply to modern and digital ones. We will see how the tape recorder, record player, and analog mixer provide for us models and examples of how we work with audio in a digital way these days with modern equipment. It is important to understand this lineage. Understanding the analog audio path is an important step to understanding digital audio. Analog audio recording, editing, and playback is at the core of what we do in the music industry. We will focus on the basics of analog audio. The mixer is the central hub of most home studios and live music settings. It is important to get to know its makeup. There are many types of mixers of all shapes and sizes, but generally they all are have the same basic modules, and they are usually in this orientation. The phantom power button is in the center of this mixer, but can be anywhere on other models. We can see it right here. The phantom power, if you recall, powers condenser microphones from the preamp and sends those volts back to the microphone to power it. Input gain is extremely important to a good signal. The input gain portion of the mixer is up here. Too much gain will result in clipping of the signal. Clipping occurs when the input amplitude is too intense or too much for the preamp and will result in a distorted signal. You can think of an example of if a stream of water was too intense for a receptacle, more water would come out of the edges of the fitting. Similarly, if the amplitude of a signal is too wide for the input signal path, it will get cut off and result in a signal distortion that is unwanted. Not enough gain, however, on the other side of the coin, will result in a weak signal that requires too much amplification, thereby forcing us to amplify not just the signal in an intense way, but also the noise around it. If we amplify the noise around it in an intense way, we will get what we call high noise floor. Background noise is a very common part of any recording. It is always there, and we cannot always completely eliminate it. However, managing the input gain is a great way to minimize the amount of noise in the noise floor of any recording. So finding a really good input signal, input gain for your particular application is essential. Mic input are up here. These are your XLR inputs. And this particular mixer has a combo jack, meaning that there's an XLR input on the outside, and in the middle is a 1/4-inch TS input. This is for your line input or instrument level input. We have input gain knobs over here to control the amount of energy coming from the preamp. Next, we have EQ or equalization controls. Aux sends are these next color group. The panning knobs are these color groups. We have channel on-off buttons in this particular brand of mixer. This is a Yamaha. These are also known as mute or solo buttons on other types of mixers like Mackie mixers. And we have our channel output slider. We can envision the signal coming in from the top and out the bottom and then out this side like a U shape. This slider will determine how much energy is coming out of this channel to the master output. Over here we have our output selection, our line output, our headphone output, and then we also have our meter to show us how intense our output volume is, and also sort of how much output volume we really need. Some mixers have multiple output volume sliders that are color-coded. This one has its red slider mapped to the master output slider. Mixing console channel strips usually have the same functions. A mixer's channel strip, either analog, digital, or virtual, will have the following: a mute and solo button, which either silences or activates the channel output only. And like I said, in this particular brand, Yamaha uses an on or off button for that purpose. Unity gain, which is a very important distinction on the volume slider of your input channel. Noted as 0 on most mixers, it is the point at which the output gain matches the input gain of that particular channel. It essentially means that there has been no change in amplitude to the signal that it receives, and it is simply passing out what it gets. So at unity gain, your signal is as rich or whatever it is as soon as it comes in out of the input side of the channel. Raising or lowering this slider will either increase it with positive gain or negative gain to either make it louder or quieter. Positive and negative gain describes how much positive or negative amplification is being applied to the input signal. Negative infinity is the point at which the channel signal is being attenuated or reduced into infinity, thereby creating a theoretical silence in this channel. So negative infinity means that we're drawing down the signal in so much negative gain that it is unheard. So it is important to understand that the 0 on a mixer does not mean silence, but rather no change to the volume. And negative infinity, noted on the mixer at the bottom of the slider, means that we are achieving silence in this channel. Many mixers have a PFL, or a pre-fader listen button. When this is activated, it will give you the signal unaffected by the channel fader settings. It allows you to hear this channel's input without any affectations from the whole strip. Other controls. We talked about the input gain earlier and how important that is to a healthy input signal. A healthy input signal makes the rest of this whole process so much easier. As we stated, too much results in clipping and possibly feedback, and too little may result in a high noise floor. So finding a sweet spot of your input gain is very important. The EQ is next. We have a knob for high, mid, and low EQ. This allows you to adjust the timbre of the signal. Each knob can either boost or attenuate a certain range of frequencies in the signal. Note that when the knob is set to the 12 o'clock position, there is no change to that signal. Most mixers have a feeling of a notch there when you turn the dial to 12 o'clock to have it zeroed out, or what we call reset to 0 for each knob at the top. The aux sends knobs are internal routing controls which allow you to send the signal or bypass the signal to another channel and to another output, such as an effect, or to route it differently beyond just the output side of the mixer. Those are useful for applying compressors or effects to your input signal and then routing that back in to your channel. This gives you some control over how much effect is being applied to that particular channel. The panning knob, short for panorama, refers to the position left or right in the stereo field. Note that when the knob is set to center, or 12 o'clock, that it is panned center in the stereo field. The tape recorder is very important to the development of digital editing technology that we currently use. The multi-track tape recorder is an important development from the mid-20th century in regard to analog audio technology. And in fact, it informs how we look at editing today in a digital audio workstation. Most DAWs mimic the way that tape recorders work. The reel-to-reel tape recorder allowed us to easily multi-track record, or record unique sounds on different tracks, and thereby record different instruments at different times, or be able to control the amount of energy on any track from a different instrument at a time. Record multiple takes, which means that we are recording different takes of a session. And because of the erase function, we can re-record a recording multiple times. Multi-track recording and the use of multiple takes makes it so much more flexible to record a group. Cut, copy, and splice are basic functions of tape recording editing. Because magnetic tape can easily be cut with a razor blade and literally taped back together, one can edit a recording in multiple ways. Engineers are able to literally slice out portions of a recording and reinsert a different recording into its place. Because it is an analog device, we can work with speed variations to play or record audio at different playback speeds to achieve pitch and time effects. It is important to note that in the analog realm, pitch and time are connected, meaning that if you slow down the recording, the pitch drops too. If you speed up the recording, the pitch increases. So time and pitch are connected. And also, because this is a physical media, we can literally reverse the spools of a tape recorder to play a sound backwards. Playing a sound backwards is interesting and allows us to explore a reversal of the ADSR properties of a sound. If you recall, ADSR is attack, decay, sustain, and release, and applies to the amplitude envelope, or the articulation, of a sound. So, if you can picture the sound of a piano note, if we reverse that piano note sound, we will get a long attack and a very short decay. On the right, we have some diagrams. We have a picture of a Studer reel-to-reel, and we also down here have a diagram of the parts of a reel-to-reel. We have the supply wheel and the take-up reel. And we have other common parts of your standard tape machine, such as the capstan and pinch roller, which pulls the tape through the mechanism. But most importantly, we see the three heads of our tape recorder. E stands for erase, R stands for record, and P stands for playback. These three are separate heads underneath this hood here. The tape passes through the spools and underneath this hood and passes by those heads in order: erase, record, and playback. It is important to understand the functions of a multi-track tape recorder, as it serves as the foundation for what we do now in the digital realm with computers. The supply reel and take-up reel are important because these parts allow us to see the beginning and ending of a signal. The erase, record, and playback heads are important because it allows us to understand the different functions that tape machines allow us to use. And the transport controls. These transport controls are still universally used today to show record, pause, stop, play, play and reverse, or fast forward and rewind. Below, we have a diagram of the multiple tracks on a traditional cassette tape and the amount of channels that it allows us to use. Note that this is a reversible cassette. We can play this on both sides. We can also see how the 4 tracks of a tape can also be used in one direction to record 4 different layers at once. Magnetic tape allows us to have a very flexible medium on with which to record in an analog fashion. Loops, a very common phenomenon, is a repeated segment of audio. They are named after tape loops, which are literally created by using a snippet of tape that has been taped back onto itself, cut into a line, and then taped back together. The loop is then continuously fed into the tape machine over and over again and to create a repeated ostinato pattern. This method is used very, very much today and comes from an experimentation with tape back in the 1960s. Record players, or phonographs, predate magnetic tape and are also an extremely important development from the 19th century in regard to analog audio technology. The phonograph was first commercially available method, or the first. The phonograph was the first commercially available method of recording and distributing a performance. This technology was extremely innovative, but was not as flexible as magnetic tape. For instance, you cannot erase or rearrange sounds once they've been imprinted on a record. However, we can manipulate a record in multiple ways to explore different sounds. Recorded music is translated into microgrooves, which are etched into the polyvinyl chloride material that records are made from. These microgrooves are then rotated and passed under a stylus and a phonograph needle, which senses the vibrations in the groove and converts them into positive and negative charge in a wire. The wire then passes from the phonograph cartridge through the arm and then through the chassis of the phonograph and to eventually a preamp. Signal from a phonograph requires a preamp. Some phonographs, especially modern ones, have a preamp built in. Others, older ones, require a preamp at the receiver level, usually a hi-fi receiver. Early records were of monosignal or monaural recordings. They were recorded with only one microphone and with only one audio channel. If we play back over two speakers, both channels will have either the same audio or two mono signals passed to them. Later records were in stereo or stereophonic, meaning that they were recorded with two microphones. The two microphones mimic the two ears on the human head and provide a more realistic sense of listening a three-dimensional space. Stereo attempts to mimic a more realistic listening experience by having a unique mix for left and right channels. Phonograph editing techniques or manipulation techniques include speed variation, which is, again, an analog concept where we are dealing with pitch and time in a connected way. We can play back a record at various speeds, thereby manipulating the pitch as well. We can create what we call locked groove loops, where we notch a groove in the record so that it is intentionally forced to repeat a segment of audio. Sometimes, if a record is scratched accidentally, it creates an interesting loop. Looping in popular music emerged from the discovery of the inherent rhythm involved with record loops. And scratching occurs when you rub the record back and forth so that a single sound or the articulation of a sound is slowly and repeatedly picked up by the phonograph needle. This is most effective with certain articulation types, and it is definitely a part of hip-hop culture in the 1980s and 90s, and even today. However, it is important to remember these techniques have been used and experimented with for many, many years and are centuries old. Although we are focusing on analog audio techniques in this module, it is important to note that these recording and editing techniques are still at the core of what we do in a digital audio workstation. Computers today allow us to work with multiple tracks, perform speed variations, cut, copy, and splice, and reverse audio in an instant. They also provide an abundant loops library for us to utilize. Furthermore, the controls we use on screen mimic the analog audio mixer channel design and the tape machine transport controls. They have the same essential functions and even resemble them. We can see on these pictures here, this is from Ableton, and you can see that the stop, play, pause, rewind, and so on are very, very similar to the tape controls in the previous slide. Additionally, this mixer view, coupled with the timeline view, shows us how the timeline view mimics the analog tape multi-track recording process, as well as the analog mixer.